Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Horror by the Book. I'm here with Pinhead. We're going to talk about Clive Barker today. So, here we go. Cue it. Okay, we're back. I'm really excited to do this episode. Clive Barker is my favorite author. I've read a ton of his work. He is absolutely an amazing teller of tales. But don't take my word for this. Let's go to other scholars on the subject. Let's try Stephen King for one. I think Clive Barker is so good that I am literally tongue-tied. He makes the rest of us look like we've been asleep for the past 10 years. That's a pretty substantial quote. Let's go to Quentin Tarantino. He says, to call Clive Barker a horror novelist would be like calling the Beatles a garage band. He is the great imaginer of our time. He knows not only our greatest fears, but also what delights us, what turns us on, and what is truly holy in the world. Haunting, bizarre, beautiful. Quentin, well said. That's exactly right. So let's get into some of these books, and let's get going. The Hellbound Heart. Hellbound Heart was the first book I ever read of his, I believe. It was given to me as a gift. And it was the most fascinating, weird story I'd ever read, I thought. And very, very dark. It spawned Pinhead here. And Pinhead, you behave, or I'll put you back in the garage. Okay. And Pinhead is a Cenobite, right? And he comes when somebody opens this special puzzle box. And he doesn't care if you're a good guy or a bad guy. He just shows up, and you're going back to his little demon home, or hell, whatever you want to call it, his realm. There's more than one Cenobite. He's actually not called Pinhead. That came later because of the Hellraiser movies that he is in. But in the Engineer, in the book, he's called the Engineer. It's not Pinhead. So, the book is very dark. It's also very short. You can read it in no time at all, almost. But basically, nobody escapes the realm of the Cenobites. And the Cenobites, by the way, make no distinction between pain and pleasure. It's the same thing to them. That's really troublesome. But one guy did escape it by using the wife of his brother. And I won't tell you what happens. It's pretty dark. But he ends up escaping. But the Cenobites find him. So, heck of a good read. Very short, very weird. It helped put Clive Barker on the map. No doubt about it. Pinhead movies, there were quite a few of them made. Of course, the first one was Hellraiser. Somebody may think it was kind of cheesy, but the story actually follows the book, and it's a very creepy story. You're not going to find too many stories that are more awful than that in many ways. So, there's a few character changes, but in general, the movie, if you've seen the movie, it does follow the general story of the book. So, let's move on to maybe my favorite book of all time. Okay? Let's talk about The Great and Secret Show. If I was going to a desert island and somebody said, Noel, you get to take one novel with you, one piece of fiction, I'm taking The Great and Secret Show. Because Clive Barker in this paints pictures of worlds with a very finely tuned brush. And it's got it all in there. It's got murder, the supernatural, it's all there. And if you notice in the front of the book here, there's a mailbox. That's because the story starts where all the dead letters go. And a guy named Randolph Jaff, who becomes kind of a bad guy, starts opening these letters and ends up finding there's a code in there about the art and the sea of quiddity. And he really wants to find out more about it. So he starts committing some murders and goes on a quest for this. This book spans generations, universes. It is an amazing read. I know a couple episodes ago I talked about Pet Sematary being the perfect horror novel. This is the perfect dark fantasy novel. It's got it all in there. This is what Quentin Tarantino was talking about when he said he's a great imaginer. Nobody can write this kind of stuff like Clive. Nobody can do it. He is the best. And this is the most entertaining novel I've probably ever read. I mean, it's amazing. Amazing, amazing. If one thing you take away from my video, if there's nothing to take away from it, take away the fact that you need to read The Great and Secret Show. It is some good stuff. Let's move on to another one. Let's move on to the sequel, 5 years later, called Everville. Same kind of thing, some different characters. And that one, there's sort of a battle over the art again. And, sea quiddity, of course, separates the cosm from the metacosm. So that's the thing about Clive Barker's. He makes up these words that are like perfectly fit. Quiddity. What a good word. Anyway, once again, the great imaginer of our day. The story actually takes place in Oregon, and it involves 1 or 2 characters, I think, from the Great and Secret Show. But, bam, Everville. If you read the Great and Secret Show, you gotta follow it up with Everville. You just gotta. You just gotta do that. Let's move on. Probably, though, my second favorite book from Clive Barker is Weaveworld. Yes, Weaveworld. It has to do with a floor rug and a group of supernatural or super talented, super skilled humans called the seer kind. They end up making a fugue state, sort of. It's called the fugue. And they kind of go shrink themselves into a carpet, their society. Then the doors opened up. And a really bad person called Immaculata is trying to ruin them. She's also a seer kind. Kind of think of her as a witch. By the way, she has a horrendous sister. Her name is Magdalene. Magdalene makes guys have sexual relations with her, then burst their child 4 to 5 hours later, and the child comes out with the skin backwards, and it's horrible. Once again, welcome to the world of Clive Barker. Well, nothing seems right, and it doesn't. Weaveworld is a fantastic testament of good and evil. It's really a cool book, and I think I'm going to read that again. I checked out from the library, and I think I'm going to read it again. It's been a long time. It's that good. It's fantastic. So, right after the Great and Secret Show and Everville, hey, let's give Weaveworld a run. You can't beat a bunch of crazy special people that hang out on a carpet on purpose. Pretty cool. Okay, let's go to what got Clive going. When Stephen King first read Clive, I think he was reading the Books of Blood, which were a bunch of short stories, and he said that I have seen the future of horror, and it is Clive Barker. Well, this was one of those. I don't have them all. This one's called The Inhuman Condition. There were 6 books of blood, all containing short stories, some real macabre ones. Like, as I remember right, The Inhuman Condition had to do with a string a guy found, and every time he undoes one of the knots in it, figures out how to get it loosened up and out, one of his friends die. So it's kind of crazy, but there's stories like that. Another one was about a group of monster hunters in Arizona that fell into quicksand, and the quicksand set up, and they basically dried like a raisin in the desert heat. And there's all kinds of weird stories like that, a bunch of them. So if you like short stories, Books of Blood are for you. They're short, they're cool, they're weird. I've said before, Stephen King is a short story. These are shorter than a lot of Stephen King's stories, but they're very interesting and shows you that creative side of Clive Barker that is unparalleled. I mean, really, it really is. Now, let's go to another one. Well, a really cool one. Unique, not quite as creative, but the story's just not as wild and crazy. But, Cold Hard Canyon. So if you like Hollywood, the Hollywood history and the old stars of Hollywood, this is the novel for you. This is kind of a ghost story, and it involves a lot of dead Hollywood stars. Very, very unique and very crazy and very weird. And even weirder than you almost, Pinhead, and that's pretty hard to get. Anyway, it's a dang good read, though. It's got a fair amount of action in it for a ghost story. I would say this is one of his most spirited novels. That was bad. Okay, but read Cold Hard Canyon if you dig Hollywood. Very, very good story. Let's cover this one real quick. This is kind of a dark little novel he wrote called Mr. Begone. It has to do with a medieval devil. And it's really dark and some imagery in it that really creeps you out, frankly. And it's worth a read. It's a weekend read. Mr. Begone. I don't remember it real well, but I did read it. And I do remember one scene in it that I'm not going to tell you about because it's awful. But anyway, if you like books that have to do with Satan or the black arts, and that's a good one for you. And these books are kind of special to me. They're not even really technically horror. Magicka 1 and Magicka 2. This is what Quentino is really talking about being the imaginer of our time. These are crazy stories, and they're more fantasy than horror, for sure. But basically they're about being 5 dominions in the universe, and the Earth was one of them. But Earth's been separated from the other 4. That's why the people of Earth are freaked out by magic, spells, all that kind of stuff. They're not used to the magic and the stuff that happens in these other 4 dominions, where it's commonplace. So this is all about the reconciliation of Earth with the other 4 dominions. It is a crazy story spanning world after world. I thought it was an amazing read. You know, this city here, on here, I believe this is what he calls Zordor X. Something like that, starts with a Y, but it's, once again, it's one of Clive's names he makes up that's outrageously cool. And I feel like I've been there. I haven't, it doesn't exist. At least in this dominion. Anyway, it doesn't exist. And I feel like I've been there. Like I say, when I talk about Clive Barker painting pictures of faraway lands, this is exactly what I am talking about. Exactly, in Magicka. Incredible series. So if you like real light horror or no horror at all, Magicka is one of the best fantasy books you will ever read. I promise you. I promise you that. I, Noel Wing, will promise you this is one of the best fantasy books you will ever read. So, I've covered most of the books I want to talk about. Clive Barker's done some other stuff. Of course, he directed Hellraiser, the movie. He also writes some kids' books. I think one of them is called The Thief of Always. When I say kids' books, I'm referring to teenagers. And I think he actually draws the pictures of them, illustrates them. So, well worth checking those out if you have a teenager that likes to read and wants to read something far out and cool. Good option there. To sum it up, I can't imagine a better writer than Clive Barker. I know when I published The Shoot in summer of 2020, I started writing that when I was reading a lot of Clive Barker. And it really hit home that nobody writes like Clive Barker. I don't care who you are. In fact, I'm willing to say that if Clive Barker decided to write a romance, he'd write a better one than Danielle Steel, who is a heck of a writer in her own right. Obviously, she has sold 1 million gazillion books. But there's something to be said for somebody who has a special ability to put words together in a sentence and a paragraph and a chapter. Clive does that like nobody else. Nobody else. I have never seen anybody with his imagination. He is incredibly talented. And he's also written another one that's more of a love story, anything, called Galilee. And Galilee, it seems like it's Romeo and Juliet, Clive Barker style. There's a couple families that are warring. Like I think it's the Montagues and the Capulets, right? If I remember my Shakespeare, which I don't remember know that well. But I remember reading it thinking, this reminds me of Romeo and Juliet, Clive Barker style. Once again, it's faraway lands, distant places, smells, sounds. He brings those all alive in every book he writes. If you have not read a Clive Barker, I expect you to hop on your phone and get one ordered or something, because he's a very, very special author. And I think Stephen King said it right when he puts a lot of people to shame, because some people just have a natural ability to do something, and he found his in writing these incredible stories. So with that, Pinhead and I are going to call this episode over. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. And I hope you read Clive, because he is worth every single word, every single syllable that you take in. So, for Pinhead and myself, this is Noel Wing with Horror by the Book with Noel Wing. I'm out.